The day I found out my housemate had been secretly paying off my late father's lingering medical debts was the exact same day she sealed her final moving box and walked out of my life forever. Standing in the middle of our sun-drenched hallway, holding an unsealed envelope stamped with official bank clearance seals, my entire world tilted on its axis as I realized the woman I had spent months quietly resenting was actually the guardian angel who had been silently carrying my heaviest burden. If this story touches your heart and reminds you of the quiet miracles happening around us every day, please take a brief moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you truly believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Joining our growing community helps us bring more uplifting stories of healing and human connection to people all across the world who might be going through their darkest hours. My name is Julian, and for the past 2 years, my life had felt like a slow, agonizing crawl through an endless fog. After my father passed away following a prolonged illness, he left behind not just a void in my chest that felt impossible to fill, but a mountain of overwhelming financial obligations that threatened to strip away the small, brick townhome we had shared in the quiet outskirts of Portland. Desperate to keep a roof over my head and preserve the place where every creak of the floorboards echoed with my dad's laughter, I put out a listing for a roommate. That was how Clara entered my life, stepping through the front door on a crisp afternoon with 2 modest suitcases, a vintage camera slung over her shoulder, and a gentle, reserved smile that hinted at a past she rarely spoke about. Clara was an archivist by trade, a soft-spoken woman with chestnut hair, quiet grace, and an obsessive need for neatness that sometimes grated on my frayed, grieving nerves. In the beginning, our arrangement was strictly practical, a silent agreement between 2 people who shared a kitchen but inhabited completely different emotional worlds. I was drowning in grief, working exhausting double shifts at a local restoration firm, and returning home late in the afternoons only to stare at stacks of overdue notices sitting on the dining table. Clara, meanwhile, kept to herself, spending her afternoons cataloging old photographs or reading by the sunlit bay window, leaving neat little sticky notes on the counter whenever she replenished supplies or adjusted the thermostat. I shamefully admitted to myself that I often mistook her quiet demeanor for coldness, projecting my frustration and sense of inadequacy onto her distant presence. Whenever I caught her looking at the piles of debt notices on the counter with a thoughtful, brow-furrowed expression, I felt a defensive sting in my chest, assuming she was judging me for failing to keep my life together. I didn't realize that her silence wasn't indifference, but the careful, respectful patience of someone who recognized profound pain because she had lived through her own share of devastating loss. As the months turned into seasons, subtle shifts began happening around the house under the bright midday sun. I would come home during my lunch breaks to find my favorite meals resting under glass covers on the stove, or my father's dusty old workbench in the garage meticulously dusted and organized without a single tool misplaced. Yet, whenever I tried to thank Clara or pry into why she was being so attentive, she would simply wave it off with a gentle deflection, pointing out that she just liked keeping busy during her hours off from the archives. The distance between us remained, but beneath the surface, a fragile warmth had begun to take root. I started looking forward to those sunny afternoons when we would sit on the back porch together in complete, comfortable silence, watching the sunlight filter through the oak leaves, drinking iced tea while the city bustled softly in the distance. Without realizing it, Clara's quiet presence had become the anchor holding me together while the storm of my grief slowly began to recede. However, pride is a stubborn thing, and my inability to communicate openly nearly destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to me. 2 weeks ago, a certified letter arrived from a debt collection agency, declaring that a massive portion of my father's medical account had been paid in full by an anonymous third party. Instead of feeling relief, my toxic pride reacted with intense humiliation and paranoia, convincing me that someone was pitying me, or worse, that Clara had somehow pried into my private legal affairs. That afternoon, under the glaring glare of the midday sun, I confronted her in the living room, letting months of built-up pressure spill over in a voice far harsher than she ever deserved. I accused her of stepping over boundaries, of looking down on me, and of invading my privacy when all I wanted was to handle my own family's burdens. Clara didn't yell back, nor did she cry, she simply stood there by the sunlit kitchen island, her eyes filled with a deep, crushing sadness that cut through my anger faster than any argument could have. She softly told me that she had only ever wanted to see me breathe again without the weight of the world on my shoulders, and that if her presence caused me this much distress, it was time for her to move on. The very next morning, Clara handed me her formal notice, having arranged to rent a small apartment closer to her archival foundation in the city center. The guilt that settled over me was instantaneous and overwhelming, a heavy iron weight in my stomach that made every breath feel sharp and painful. Over the following days, I tried desperately to apologize, but Clara politely created a distance between us that felt insurmountable, focusing all her energy on packing her belongings into neat cardboard boxes. I watched helplessly as the warm, lived-in atmosphere of our home was slowly stripped away, box by box, under the bright, unfeeling light of early summer. The house grew quieter, colder, and endlessly larger, serving as a constant reminder of how my foolish pride had pushed away the only person who had truly seen my pain and tried to lighten the load. That brings us to this afternoon, a day bathed in golden, glowing daylight that felt entirely too bright for the sorrow heavy in my heart. A large moving van was parked along the curb, its side door open to the quiet suburban street as two hired movers carried the final pieces of Clara's furniture down the front steps. I stood in the entryway, watching Clara tape shut the very last box, her hands steady but her lower lip quivering ever so slightly as she smoothing down the packing tape. The air between us was thick with unsaid words, apologies trapped in my throat, and a desperate plea for her to stay that I was too terrified to voice. She turned to me, offering a faint, bittersweet smile, and held out a key ring containing her set of house keys, dropping them gently into my trembling palm. As Clara turned toward the open front door, her eyes caught an unsealed envelope sitting on the side console table, the official confirmation notice from the debt agency that I had left there earlier that morning after finally reading the fine print detailing the wire transfers made from her personal inheritance account. I picked up the paper with trembling fingers and looked at her, my voice completely choking as I finally asked her why she would sacrifice so much of her own savings for a man who had treated her with such defensive bitterness. Clara stopped on the porch, bathed in the full brilliance of the noon sun, and took a deep, shuddering breath. She explained softly that years ago, she had lost her own older brother under similar circumstances, left drowning in his unpaid medical bills while trying to grieve, and she had promised herself that if she ever had the power to save another soul from that specific, unbearable torture, she would do it without hesitation or desire for recognition. Hearing those words tore down every remaining wall around my heart, shattering my pride completely and leaving only raw, unfiltered gratitude and profound regret. I tried to speak, to offer her a proper apology, to tell her how much she meant to me, but before I could utter a single word, Clara suddenly turned around, ran back across the threshold, and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck. Before I could even draw a breath to speak goodbye, she pulled me down and kissed me with a desperate, tender honesty that made time itself seem to freeze in the brilliant daylight. It was a kiss filled with months of unspoken affection, shared sorrow, quiet forgiveness, and a promise of something entirely new rising from the ashes of our pasts. When she finally pulled back, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were shining with clear tears that mirrored my own. She smiled, a real, radiant smile that warmed the entire hallway, and told me that some goodbyes were simply meant to be fresh starts in disguise. Instead of walking down to the moving van alone, she reached out and took my hand, asking if I would walk her down to her car and perhaps let her buy me a coffee in the city so we could finally talk without any secrets or walls between us. Standing there on the front lawn under the bright afternoon sun, looking at the woman who had restored my faith in humanity, I knew that the darkest chapter of my life had finally closed, making way for a future filled with warmth, partnership, and unconditional hope. Stories like this remind us that grace often arrives in the quietest, most unexpected ways, and that letting go of our pride is always the first step toward receiving the love we truly deserve. Before you go, please leave a meaningful comment below sharing your thoughts on forgiveness, second chances, or a time when an act of unexpected kindness completely changed the direction of your life. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey.